There is nothing I find more exciting than to explore history in video games. It is always a joy to take part in real historical events within the games I play, and we certainly do not lack options. So many options in fact that I made my mission to find 101 games set in the 20th century. That's right, in this video I'll be listing and briefly describe 101 games set in the 1900s, from the year 1900 all the way to the year 2000. I will not list the same game twice, nor will I insert grand strategy games that have very long campaigns. For each title, you'll see on screen the year of setting, the title's name, and when applicable, the major historical event that took place during that time frame. On screen you see a couple of examples. But enough with the premise, let us begin this very long list. Roll the intro. We start our journey in the year 1900, in the heart of Victorian England. The Greatest Attorney Adventures tells the tale of a Japanese law student that moves to London to take part in many cases, one including the real-life writer Natsume Soseki. The setting is splendid, truly depicting well the dawn of the long century ahead of us. The sequel, Ace Attorney 2 Resolve, takes place some time later, hence in 1901, also in London but with some parts of the plot taking place in Meiji-era Japan. Shadow Memories moves the clock by 1 year, being set in a fictional city in Germany among different generations including 1902. Not the most accurate depiction, but a nice entry nonetheless. Agon brings us back to London, letting us explore the famous British Museum at its infancy in 1903. More than a game, Agon is an interactive educational experience. A more frenetic game on the list, that I review with great joy on my channel, is Carlos Juarez Gunslinger, set in American Far West. While most of the game is set in the 1880s, Kid Curry's mission does take place in the 20th century, more specifically in 1904, in the city of Parachute, Colorado. The year after, across the world, in Warsaw, Poland, protests were taking place against the occupying Russian Empire. Brutal fights reimagining the fantasy title The Farmatage, where these 1905 revolts took quite a different course. Next up, we have 3 text adventures on this list. Earthquake San Francisco for the Atari tackles the consequences of the devastating earthquake that destroyed the city in 1906. Nostalgia 1907 for the Sega Mega Drive instead explores Japan after the Russian-Japanese War, a nation that experienced great changes in this belle epoque. At last, there is Unheard Screams, a recent title that teaches about the atrocities that took place in the Congo Free State up to 1908. Going back to the Far West, in Wild West Dynasty, the adventure starts in the late 1800s, but the main story can be reached up to 1909. In the southern part of the American continent, in 1910, the Amazon was still an uncharted land, with many expeditions still taking place. Amazon Quest is among various titles to reimagine those journeys. The last Far West title on this list is of course Red Dead Redemption, that reminds us that even up to 1911 there is still action to be had across both sides of the Rio Grande, since Sean does take a detour to participate in the famous Mexican Revolution. From Mexico moved to Canada, more specifically in the northern half of the Atlantic Ocean, where the famous Titanic sank the 15th of April 1912. The unsinkable ocean liner needs no presentations, and the games that take place on it are not scarce either. Titanic Adventure of Our Time is one of them, but any other option would do. The year later, in 1913, world tension started to increase exponentially, with the 2 Balkan Wars being falling dominoes in what soon would come. Wars Across the World has available both the First and the Second Balkan War, where the player can change the fate of the continent before the great event. Unfortunately for us, history cannot be changed. As depicted by Valiant Hearts' The Great War, in 1914 Archduke Franz Ferdinand meets his fate in Sarajevo, and thus the First World War begins. The Schiffenplan offensive of Belgium and France steamrolled in the summer, almost reaching Paris by September. The year later, trench warfare began, and all sides searched for a way to break the deadlock. Italy joining the fight was one way to extend the front line. As depicted in Battlefield 1, the Allies tried to break through the Alps by the various battles of Isonzo that took place in 1915. In 1916, the trenches in France became heated, with the exhaustive Battle of Verdun taking many lives over the 9 months it lasted. The battle is visible in various games, true, but there is no better example to bring up than the appropriately named game Verdun. 1917 was a dark year for the war. In Passchendaele, near Ypres, gas was used again and again to empty the enemy trenches. This horror is hard to depict. 11/11 Memories Retold tried its best to convey the destruction the war brought to Belgium and the whole world. Even if the First World War eventually ended in 1918, the same year the Russian Civil War started after the 2 famous revolutions. Assassin's Creed Chronicles Russia and the upcoming 1919 depict only 2 years of the long conflict that took place in Eurasia. For many innocent people, this decade was truly something else. But let us change chapter and move to the Roaring Twenties, a time of prosperity and hope, at least less global conflicts. During the celebrations, I think somebody had too much fun, since January 1920 the Volstead Act was enacted, marking the start of Prohibition. Empire of Sin starts its story from here, but believe me, we'll get to talk about this era soon enough. First, let's go back to Latin America to play Mexico 1921 A Deep Slumber, a title that explores the aftermath of the previously cited Mexican Revolution. The internal conflict might be over, but the questions left unanswered are many. Meanwhile, in the northern part of the border, the Roaring Twenties were just starting in America, and many are the games set in this peaceful time. The Great Gatsby's Secret Treasure Hunt reimagines the famous novel set in 1922 in this video game form, more specifically a puzzle game. 1 year later, in 1923, in the title Drogen, an American travels to Norway also to unfold a great mystery. The original Alone in the Dark for the 3DO is set in 1924, in an old abandoned mansion down in Louisiana. A similar tale is told by the Colonel's Bequest, set 1 year later in 1925, this time in an unspecified island. If you would like to play another Sierra Online classic, The Dagger of Amon-Ra lets you explore the Egyptology craze of the period of 1926. But America was not the only country to have fun. In Ein Baden im großen Schauspielhaus, you get to live and breathe in Berlin during the Weimar Republic in 1927, a culturally rich time for Germany. Across the channel 1 year later, Peaky Blinders The King's Ransom lets you experience the famous series set in 1928 in VR. Unfortunately, nothing is forever. As we all know, in 1929 the market crashed, kickstarting the Great Depression. Face Noir lets the player relive the Black Thursday in its narrative adventure, filled with drama and art deco. Chicago 1930 portrays the escalating gangster fights that took place during the Prohibition, more specifically in a Midwest city over the Great Lakes. Back to the Future, the Telltale video game, also explores this side of history, but on the other side of the country, where Marty McFly finds himself face to face with his grandpa in true Back to the Future fashion. But how could I talk about this era without mentioning the one and only first Mafia game, and its remake Mafia Definitive Edition? Tommy Angelo somehow finds himself part of the Don Salieri family, one of the most powerful Italian crime syndicates in the city of Lost Heaven, a mirror image of New York City in 1932. But at last, in 1933, America took a step back and ended its Prohibition era, with Jack Orlando Director's Cut depicting its last year of force and the time after that. Agatha Christie, Murder on the Oriental Express, follows suit, with the game based on the well-known 1944 novel. Hercules Poirot's case is legendary, and many are the adaptations it got. While the detective was having a hard time to solve the case on the train, in China the civil war was getting intense, with many warlords from south to north fighting for the crown. Since 1935 is an upcoming indie game that tells the tale of a survivor, one of many that lived in the Chinese countryside. Back in the United States, the situation with the mobsters did not come down just after reversing Prohibition. The Godfather video game shows us that 1936 was an active year for criminals like any other. Similar to Mafia, the streets of the cities are as chaotic as ever. Two Indiana Jones games follow suit, more specifically the recent Indiana Jones and the Great Circle for 1937 and Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade for the NES for 1938. The American archaeologist travels around the world to find hidden treasure to expand the museum's collection and take them away from the Germans' hands. Speaking of, yes, as you correctly pointed out, 1939 marks the start of the Second World War in Europe after many escalating events. In September, Germany invades Poland, kickstarting a chain of events across the world. Land of Wars: The Beginning is one of the few games that depicts the initial hours of the war. The events of the Second World War are many, and it's quite challenging to pick the quote-unquote most important one for each year, so do feel free to bring more examples down in the comments below. In 1940, Germany invades France, and the famous Dunkirk evacuation took place, in Day of Infamy among other games. 1 year later, in 1941, the Japanese entered the war by attacking the Americans in Hawaii. Medal of Honor Pacific Assault depicts the attack on Pearl Harbor. Let's just say an unwelcome surprise that made the war even more global. 1942 marks the first few counter-offensive of the Allies, the Battle of Stalingrad on one end and El Alamein on the other. Call of Duty Vanguard depicts the latter in quite high detail, as you can see on screen, and be assured that examples of the former in gaming are many as well. From Africa, move to Italy, with the 1943 Allied invasion of Sicily depicted in Sniper Elite 4, one of the many games set in Italy as cited in a previous video. In 1944 is France's turn for a big landing, more specifically in Omaha Beach. World War II games set in Normandy could fit an entire video. Call of Duty WW2 is the most modern example I could find, but there is no more reused location in gaming than northern France. At last, in 1945, Germany was in crumbles and about to fall, ending the global conflict. Sniper Elite V2 brings the player to a destroyed Berlin, icon of fears of war and the destruction it brought. Berlin was where the war started, and where the war ended. From the planes of war to civil flights, Airbox is a manager title that lets you start your own civil airline in 1946. A good change if you ask me. 1947 is the year of setting of L.A. Noire, Rockstar's detective game set in 40s America. The setting is impeccable with many details and a nice change of pace from other Rockstar's titles, truly a hidden gem. After the World Wars, the Cold War started, with the Berlin blockade being one of the most crucial events of the era. East vs West Berlin 1948 is one of among various spy titles of the list that take place in the then divided Germany. Flight of the Amazon Queen takes place in 1949, but to be honest, there's not much to say about the title, other than the fact that it's inspired by Indiana Jones. After the brutal Japanese occupation, Korea was split up in two areas of control, and inevitably in 1950 the North and the South went to war. SGS Korea War might be an old title, but its focus on the Korean War is meticulous and detailed even to this day. Mafia 2 brings us back to America, this time during the booming 50s. The new protagonist might not drive to Canada to import booze, but 1951 still remains quite active for organized crime. Eternal Darkness is set a year later in 1952 France, but the game is more subtle about it. 1953 KGB Unleashed is yet another title themed around the Cold War, this time in a Soviet bunker lost in Siberia. From Russia all the way to Vietnam, the First Indochina War saw plenty of action in the Battle of Dien Bien Phu in 1954, depicted in the indie game Glorious Memories Revived. New York Mystery Secrets of the Mafia is yet another depiction of 1955 American crime, not much else to add. What is interesting to do, however, is to fly across the world and explore post-war Japan, in the two visual novels Kara no Shouju and The Shell Part 2 Purgatorio, set in 1956 and 1957 respectively. It is interesting to see how Japan changed from the American occupation to the economic miracle, topics of the two visual novels. To close off the 50s with some light-toned Americana, we have This Spell We Made and Deliver It at All Cost, two games set in 1958 and 1959 respectively. These titles go all in with the aesthetics, and while they do not tackle any specific historical event, it's nice to experience history also with everyday life activities. But don't you worry, history in America is being made every 4 years with the recurring presidential elections, and 1960 is no difference. In President-elect for the Apple II and Commodore 64, the player can either emulate Kennedy's electoral victory of the year or run against him selecting Vice President Nixon. It is your campaign to run after all. America is not the sole country in the New World to have a new president by 1961. Cuba also went through some political changes in the 60s, aligning itself with the Soviet Union. Communism in America's backyard was not on the agenda, thus the CIA kickstarted the Bay of Pig invasion, a special operation of little success depicted in Call of Duty Black Ops. Speaking of the CIA, in a bit of an alternative scenario in 1962, President Kennedy ordered the creation of a parallel organization ready to defend America for any potential attack. The Bureau, XCOM Declassified, is the prequel of the whole franchise, and it depicts a beautiful 60s America. Moving further, Toasted Size is a comedy game set in Texas in 1963. I'm not too sure how to describe this game, but it has a free demo and it's quite fun to play. Give it a shot. For 1964, we have The Raven Remastered, a game that goes all in with the aesthetics, not to mention an interesting investigative narrative. Not all corners of the world were living a peaceful decade, however. As you probably are aware, back in Vietnam, the war was only getting more and more intense under Lyndon B. Johnson. In 1965, the first American troops arrived in Asia, as depicted in Men of Valor, and they will stay there fighting for many years to come. Just to mention other two games set in the war, there are Rising Storm 2 Vietnam, which has a very long campaign in the country that includes the year 1966, and Shellshock Nam 67, set the following year. Needless to say that this war did not end well for the Americans, and the following year's Tet Offensive did not improve their situation. Back in the USA, Vietnam War veteran Lincoln Clay goes back home to New Orleans, where he experienced a changing America. The Louisiana metropolis and its surrounding swamps feel authentic, and the free-roaming third entry in the Mafia franchise truly immerses the player in the world of 1968. GTA 5 London 1969 does something similar but in 2D England, a classic still enjoyable today. Serial Cleaner also deals with criminal gangs of the 1970s, but with the unique aspect of being a cleaner of criminal scenes rather than the criminal itself. 1971 Indian Naval Front deals with the Indo-Pakistani War of that year, being one of the most brutal conflicts in the subcontinent. I don't know much about this war, but from what I gathered, the naval part of the war took place mostly in Bangladeshi waters. A Way Out follows suit, set in 1972 somewhere in Colorado. The title feels like a 70s movie but made as a co-op video game. A year later, the Yom Kippur War started, and in the indie game Saga, you get to manage the backscheme of the 1973 conflict, from spy networks to field warfare. Speaking of spying, two MGS games are next. Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker is set in Costa Rica in 1974, and Ground Zeroes in Cuba in 1975. The two games are heavily inspired by the spy war during the era between the Western Hemisphere and the Soviet bloc. Driver 76 is less about spies and more about, well, driving in 70s New York City. If driving on the PSP is not your style, however, you can always be a superhero vigilante in Watchmen The End Is Nigh, set in 1977 DC Universe and readapted into gaming. The next title I have on my list is Wheels of Aurelia, set in Central Italy in 1978. I'm actually planning to make a video about this game, so I'll keep it brief. This game truly immerses you in the time period, with conversations addressing events of the time such as the abortion legalization and Aldo Moro's kidnapping. It is quite an immersive experience, especially for an Italian like myself. From Italy we go to Iran, to the video game 1979 Revolution Black Friday. As the name suggests, the narrative-driven title is set during the Iranian Revolution, a crucial event of the history of the country. We make a quick stop to play The Casting of Frank Stone set in 1980, to then go back to Iran in Call of Duty Cold War to tackle the Iranian hostage crisis of 1981, more specifically the end of it. No continent is safe from war in this decade, not even South America. In 1982, Argentina launched an invasion into the Falkland Islands to claim back what they call Las Islas Malvinas. In Project Reality, players can take either side in the South Atlantic conflict. Phantom Doctrine places itself right in 1993, being yet again a spying thriller adventure. But the biggest spy of them all, Solid Snake, takes no rest in 1994, since he's sent to Central Asia to take part in the Soviet-Afghan War, a prelude for what is to come. We've mentioned far too many war games, so let us kick back for a moment and enjoy Retro City Rampage set in 1985, the 80s made into a video game. For a quote-unquote more realistic experience, you can always play GTA Vice City, set in Miami in 1986. Both games are very enjoyable sandboxes, you play it safe if you choose either. Asia was also having a great time in this golden decade, as can be seen in Shenmue 2 and Yakuza 0. The former title is set in Hong Kong in 1987, sequel to the first Shenmue set the year prior in Yokohama. Yakuza 0 on the other hand is set in 1988 Tokyo, where the 80s vibes can be lived in the digital world. Curious to see that in every video I make, somehow I always end up talking about Yakuza and Like a Dragon. To close off the 80s, we have Hotline Miami, that just like Vice City, captures the Florida spirit in all of its glory and madness in 1989. Maybe not the most realistic depiction, but a fun one to play nonetheless. Unfortunately, the 90s do start off with a war in the Middle East, more specifically in Iraq. Conflict Desert Storm and Call of Duty Black Ops 6 take place during the first Gulf War in 1990 and 1991 respectively. In comparison to modern conflicts, this one was a bit forgotten, but it's definitely a key event in history that is reflected on this list. In Europe, the situation is not much better, with brutal conflicts taking place all over Yugoslavia, or more accurately what remained of it. The Siege of Sarajevo of 1992 is one event amongst many, depicted in all of its brutality in this war of mines. Conflict also arose in Somalia at the same time in 1993, a civil war depicted in Delta Force Black Hawk Down. Fortunately for us, this is the last war game that makes up this list. Her Story is a crime investigative title set in America in 1994, where the player conducts an investigation by diving into all recordings of police interrogations and confessions. The OG Metal Gear Solid follows suit, being set in 1995, or at least that's what the Western version of the game claims. Quarter 1996, as the name suggests, is set in the 90s, and the vibes of the game certainly give that impression. Two GTA games are next, the original and Liberty City Stories, set respectively in 1997 and 1998, both in NYC. As per usual, these two classics need no introduction, being perfect sandboxes that encapsulate the time era. As we reach the end of the century, we go one last time to Japan to play Persona 2 Innocent Sin, a game released and set in the year 1999. The Persona franchise was small back then, but as time would have it, Persona is quite well known brand today, with various award-winning installments. And just south of the Japanese Isles, there is Australia, home to the 2000 Olympic Games in Sydney, depicted in the game of the same name. Perhaps not a big release when compared to the historic event, but well, what better way to close off the century than with this millennial tradition? And there you have them, 101 games set in the 20th century. The 1900s were filled with key historical events and colossal cultural changes that took place across generations. Eric Husband ironically defined the century as short, something that this video is clearly not. This list took me way longer than anticipated. Using all resources I could possibly find, I still struggled to find games for so many specific years. I had to force some picks a bit, but I tried my best to keep the integrity of the list intact. Did you play any of the games I've listed? Do you think they depict the century well? Let me know down in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed seeing the evolution of history taking place year by year in the gaming world. If you made it this far, I wanted to thank you one too many centuries times for watching today's video. Believe it or not, this is the 100th video I've made with its current format, excluding the shorts and the private videos such as the speedruns. But a milestone to reach, and what a way to celebrate it too! If you guys enjoyed this video, I might even go one century in the past. I wish you all a wonderful day, and until next time, arrivederci!